Isn't it strange that a city like Delhi, which has been the capital of India and always had a majority Hindu population, doesn't have a single magnificent temple that is historically significant? Delhi has grand medieval mosques like Jama Masjid, Sunheri Masjid, churches like St. James Church, and even gurudwaras, but no old temples of the same size and grandeur. The first major temple to be built in Delhi was the Birla Temple in 1939, followed by Chhatarpur Temple and Akshardham Temple even more recently. Hindus built magnificent temples in the past. Their masons were artists of the highest caliber, and the specimens of their high art can be seen even today in South India, which was spared the effects of Muslim rule for the most part. As a result, there are large temples that survive in the south from the medieval and ancient times. In stark contrast, for almost 1000 years, 800 years of Muslim rule, and almost 200 years of British rule, no magnificent temples were built by Hindus in the north. Today, they mostly pray within the confines of their own homes. What happened to the temples that existed before that period? They were destroyed by the invaders. Thousands of them, as Sitaram Goel has documented in his painstakingly researched book, Hindu Temples, What Happened to Them? The cultural, social, and educational life of Hindus revolved around their temples. When the temples were destroyed, the very fabric of Hindu society got severely damaged. It was not just the temples that were under assault, but the whole society. The destruction of temples was accompanied by widespread murder, rape, slavery, including sex slavery and loot. As the great historian Will Durant has noted in his book The Story of Civilization, the Islamic conquest of India is probably the bloodiest story in history. It's a discouraging tale, for its evident moral is that civilization is a precious good whose delicate complex of order and freedom, culture and peace can at any moment be overthrown by barbarians invading from without or multiplying within. This destruction over centuries created a fear that paralyzed the Hindu society, and they could not think of building another temple lest it be destroyed again. The spell of fear began to end with the building of Birla Temple in 1939. The freedom struggle and the feeling of nationalism led people to rise above this fear, and no less a person than Mahatma Gandhi came to inaugurate the Birla Temple for this reason. However, the freedom struggle, though it brought about India's independence from colonial rule, culminated with the infliction of one of the deepest wounds on Indian psyche, the partition of India's sacred geography. Fear in societies is passed on from generation to generation, often in silence, and is called transgenerational trauma. Societies that face persecution, genocide, and loss of their sacred spaces go through it till they come to terms with their grief, either by giving up their identity altogether or reclaiming what they have lost. As a clinical psychologist, I can tell you there is no third way of reconciling with transgenerational trauma. Either you reclaim what you have lost or you give up your identity. Living with collective trauma is as debilitating for a society as living with unhealed psychological scars is for an individual. Fear, shame, and thoughts of survival prevent us from sharing events that traumatize us. And we build a culture of silence in the family, in the community where certain topics are not discussed and considered too painful. Yet research shows that everyone knows what those topics are as they are passed on in silence from one generation to another. Issues of assault on women, violence on male members, and shame for not being able to protect one's loved ones get permanently etched on the mind and are passed unconsciously from one generation to the next under a cloak of secrecy. For Hindu society, the present times are a time of regaining conscious awareness of the loss they have faced in the last 1000 years. As Hindus begin to understand the loss, they also try to reverse their grief cycle to reclaim their sacred spaces that were desecrated and destroyed by invaders. The Ram Janmabhoomi movement is thus an attempt to reclaim the sacred space that was lost to alien rulers. Seen in this light, the destruction of the Babri Masjid was an eruption of the grief cycle that had been suppressed for centuries. Clearly, violence cannot be ruled out in such a scenario, which is why it is imperative for the Indian state to keep the psychological dimension of the conflict in mind and work out honest solutions in accordance with it. Not just for the Ram temple dispute specifically, but also the larger issue of peaceful coexistence. The time of meaningless platitudes and thought policing jargon is well over. A sincere acknowledgement of the grief and transgenerational trauma will enable the Indian state to understand the needs and aspirations of the masses that were buried under a cloak of secrecy for centuries. As they say, listen to the voice of the subaltern. This is Rajat Mitra for Upward.